I'm Gillian Jones, as it says, Business Development Manager for Condatis. And we have Matt Fernandes here, so he now knows that you are talking today. We're all up to speed, so it's all good. And what we're really looking to talk about today is some of the work that Condatis and ITC Secure have been doing in partnership around onboarding, around how we can facilitate the smoother onboarding of staff, basically enabling new technologies such as decentralised identity, and making that something that's actually deployable, and that we're going to talk a lot about. Somebody far smarter than me said this yesterday about the evolution of identity rather than the revolution of identity, and how this actually can be embedded. So hopefully we're going to talk about some kind of tangible, real world things that we can be doing today, and how that can apply to government departments as well as what we're seeing in the private sector.
So it's interesting the way our two businesses actually partner in this space. Condatis focus very much on the external identity area, and ITC Secure, we're typically a managed security service. We've got a SOC based in London, but we also do a lot of identity and cloud-based security. So we're tackling kind of the internal things, the joiner, mover, leaver processes, the things that have been around since the days of NT4 and the birth of Active Directory. What we're working on moving forwards is how we take what's already there and layer in these new technologies to increase efficiencies, lower operational costs, and actually fundamentally improve people's user experience while maintaining a level of security.
Exactly right. So we thought we'd kind of set the scene, and hopefully this will resonate with a lot of people in the room, and certainly those that are online as well, just in talking about some of the kind of common challenges that we see across our customer base. And like I said, this is not public versus private sector. This is, mostly the people that we speak to on a regular day. And what we see particularly around workforce management and bringing on new people, and again, was heightened during the pandemic. I was actually onboarded to Condatis during the pandemic, so I can talk about this from a personal point of view. Is things like the admin burden, obviously security risk, which I know that you're very much all over, regulatory compliance, especially if you're working in highly regulated industries. Like, all of these are hopefully are kind of common threads that we see across multiple different industries. And that's probably been a lot of the talk track that we've had, is how do we support this? How can we take new technologies, like we say, we'll talk about some of the Microsoft products, for example, and how do we layer them on top of what is already in place today, right?
Yeah, and we've spoken a lot today, or we've heard people speak a lot today about common challenges. We've all got our horror stories of where we've turned up somewhere and they've gone, we've got to complete this month-long verification process before you can actually log on and do any work. Been there, it was painful. Especially when the job that we're there to do is to actually help make that process easier so that people can get started quicker. There's a lot of blend between those processes for internal people as well as for externals. The onboarding of someone accessing government services, the process is very similar to someone who's coming to onboard staff. There's different checks and verifications that need to be made, but the actual fundamental mechanisms are very similar.
Yeah, exactly right. So I suppose what we're really going to dive into is how we can show efficiencies by using the technology, how we can support digitisation and further kind of digitisation of current processes. We do not want to compromise on quality or security, and basically use, there's been a lot of discussion around industry standards and things, so we're talking about the building blocks and how we can kind of, build on top of that. So let's get some questions. How do you think verified credentials, as an example, and particularly Microsoft Entra Verified ID, how do you think that can really support HR and operational systems when we are dealing with staff particularly, that could then extrapolate out into citizens in other areas?
So in the very first use case of onboarding somebody, especially if it's all done remotely, as we've seen over the last couple of years, there's this fundamental thing of how do I know that the person I'm talking to is the person I'm talking to? And through an HR process, there's a lot of, can I scan your passport? Can I see your driving license? Can I see your SC clearance? Can I do X, Y, and Z? And all of this has to happen before day one. And before any actual access or identities are created for the person to access any systems. Where the verified ID parts come in is, instead of needing someone in HR to go away and verify all of this stuff, actually the user brings their verified identities with them and says, hey, look, I've already got this thing on my phone that says the DVLA has got my driving license. So all that HR needs to do is say, right, okay, I need these 3 attributes. Are they valid? The user then does their biometrics to say, yeah, I'm happy for these bits of data to go to this company, and that's it, done, seconds. Which means then that onboarding, instead of taking weeks, takes seconds, minutes, and they can immediately get started onto the next part of the red tape and processes and et cetera. So it all sounds very, oh, isn't this amazing? We just do this thing and magic happens. But from an internal perspective, using verified ID, there is actually things that can be done and deployed right now using the existing technology that uses some of these scenarios and benefits kind of everybody. And one of those is a similar situation to that onboarding process of how do I know that the person on the end of the phone is the person that I'm supposed to be talking to? And say someone calls your help desk and says, I need this thing to happen. And the help desk person goes, okay, give me your employee number and I'll add that to the ticket. And that employee number is something that really anybody can find out. It wouldn't take much effort. So it's not really a verified attribute that we can guarantee that it is the right person. It could be anybody. So it's possible now with Entra Verified ID to deploy your verification system within your Azure Active Directory with those attributes trusted in there because you know your employees, you know if they work for you, you know if they're still working for you because you've got their start and end dates. So when someone rings up the help desk, that engineer can now say, oh, I need you to verify. And then there's several factors. The person's got to have the information in their wallet. They've got to have their phone with them. They've got to have their biometrics assigned to it. We can much better verify that it is the person that we need to, and then we can actually, crack on and do all of the other bits quicker. So we're then adding another layer of trust in to something that could be a privileged access or a privileged escalation of something that would be remote.
Yeah, exactly right. So if we think about, I suppose, kind of what we're talking about with Entra Verified ID, but just generally the sorts of things we're talking about, I think we're, and again, I'm hoping this is all very common challenges that we've all experienced and why I suppose we have a lot of passion for what we're doing and what we're doing as a kind of, in collaboration, the two companies is, it's all about identity binding. So if you're coming on board into an organization or you're moving into different organizations, it's about being able to, as you say, prove that you've got that identity, you are who you say you are, but then you have your degree qualifications, or you have other things that are about you that are as important for you to perform your job, that I am who I say I am, I have the skills, I have the current qualifications that I need to be able to perform my job. And therefore we can, really support what is potentially a very cumbersome process in terms of finding, we know that many people, particularly, in heavily regulated industries or in heavy engineering would be one of the examples that we've seen, doctors and nurses, they've got years potentially of qualifications that they've got to prove, and you can't be walking about with a massive ring binder all the time, right? You need to be able to have this in a way that you can store, you can share, and also that you're doing that in a trusted environment. So I think these are really the things that we're wanting to support. And the reason we are talking so heavily about Microsoft is because obviously, particularly within public sector and private sector, they have such a large install base, and this is something that's available now. So we're not saying to everybody here, oh, rip and replace, anything that you've been doing prior is no longer good enough. It's not that at all. It's how can you extend, how can you future-proof, and how can you look to what comes next as standards are evolving, as we're looking at kind of, these huge projects which will be citizen related. What are the things that we can do now to prove this out so that they can extend out into the future, I think is really kind of what our focus has been between the organisations.
Yeah, and so a couple of statistics, right? So we've heard mentioned before of the number of authentications that are going through the Microsoft platform right now. From a Microsoft security standpoint, in 2022, the kind of token relay attacks that they're seeing, there was 5.8 billion attacks that their security system found and prevented before it even got further into users. For password spray attacks, that was 5 million. But the scary statistic here is not the number of attacks of those different types that were found. It is the fact that only 26% of administrators in the platform actually have any multi-factor turned on. So we've got still this really broad attack surface where we've got a lot of sensitive data stored, and we actually still have some of the fundamentals not turned on. Like turning on, phish-resistant MFA will stop like 99% of attacks, and yet we still don't have that. So one of the things that has been spoken about a lot today is having these central repositories of attributes that can be used by people across all these different organizations, and that's a massive target. So if we still got these gaps in our security process and our identity security, how can we expect those repositories to stay safe? And one of the key ways to reduce that attack surface is actually not to hold on to the data at all. So if we're using something like Verified ID and we're using it on a decentralized platform, I don't have to worry as a citizen that my data is being stored in a database somewhere that's being shared with private entities or being sold on to some analytics company or whatever. I can see it, I can verify that actually I own it. And even when I'm sharing that data, I'm not walking up to a bouncer at a nightclub and showing them my driving license. I'm showing them a green tick that proves I'm allowed to drink. So I can keep my information private, and the organizations that I'm dealing with can trust, because of the people who have issued those identity credentials, that the attributes are valid.
Yeah. And like we said at kind of the beginning of the discussion, this is evolution, not revolution. So we're not expecting people to start with all of these big complex problems. Start with the ones that are most solvable, that can be resolved today by using the technology. So that's why we've heavily focused kind of on employees, on staff movement, on onboarding, because it's still that kind of closed ecosystem where you do have that level of control, and you do have existing frameworks and policies and kind of things that are tried and tested. So I hope certainly we're not coming across as this is the only way. It's absolutely not, but it is about choice, and it is about enabling, technology where technology is appropriate. And I can't help but laugh that I'm sat here with my pieces of paper and you're sat with your iPad. Like, we're literally a visual embodiment of what we're talking about here, because that's what we have to do. We have to offer that choice, but also do it in a way that is actually deployable and that is not preventative for, government departments or for enterprises to be able to kind of implement this. So I think, as I say, we've done lots of talking and lots of thinking on this, haven't we? And we're going to be outside over the lunch break and another break, so I'm so kind of delighted to talk about that a little bit more. So, sorry, you come in.
Yeah, I was just going to say, on this whole evolution, not revolution thing, where there's been a lot of talk recently about phish-resistant multi-factor authentications and some of the older technologies. I know probably a lot of people in this room, to some degree, are still reliant on ADFS, or Active Directory Federation Services, to handle some of their single sign-on operations. And in the last few months, Microsoft have come out and said, even though it's their product and it's not really going away anywhere, they've held their hands up and gone, hey guys, everything's moving very quickly. This is now not safe. If you have ADFS on-prem in your environment, there is no way you can protect it against attackers sufficiently. Someone will get in. So the recommendation there is to evolve the technology you've got so that you can layer in these other controls, you can phase out the old stuff, but have something in there that will keep up over time and is receiving the latest kind of technology and the fun stuff that we all want to use, but where people don't notice. The interface doesn't change. People just carry on doing their day-to-day lives, but from a infrastructure and a security platform or perspective, we can be sure that we're hitting the right standards, that we are protecting our crown jewels as much as we can, and that we're not actually storing unnecessary stuff, and that we can offload as much as we can to the people who actually want to have control of that data so that we don't have to.
Yeah, and without putting too fine a point on it, we know that Microsoft are spending significantly more money than, say, any of our companies would or can or will. So we may as well leverage a lot of the work and the experience and a lot of the learnings that they've got in the development resource in these areas. So again, we're seeing a lot of traction there. So I guess in summary, what we're really saying is, and again, this is something that we hear kind of across a lot of our customer engagements when we're speaking to a variety of people, is we're wanting to enhance technology. We're wanting to give people the ability to future-proof, to use standards and to use technology that is emerging, but obviously does already have some really, really strong use cases. Use them in an environment where you can prove out the technology so that in the future it can extend out to citizens or whatever that might look like, as a lot of the governance and on all of that good stuff that's been discussed kind of at length is still evolving. But ultimately, we're wanting to look at this as a way to, really provide time saving. So admin burdens, HR overheads, what else could that team be doing instead of chasing up paper that just does seem to be particularly laborious. We want to talk about enhanced security. As I said at the beginning, this is not about compromising security at all. It's actually about making it better and also offering a better experience. As I say, it's a running joke I talk about all the time. I recently bought a house and it was torturous. It was absolutely torturous in terms of how many times I had to give the same information from, people that I've worked with for a really long time. So that wasn't great, and there are definitely better ways of doing it. And we do genuinely believe that there are solutions out there, and we're very familiar with them, and we're looking to see how that can potentially support people kind of in their digital ambitions going forward.
Any questions? Let me just ask one first.
Sure.
Who in the organisation will be the people who introduce these verifiable credentials? Which officers are going to be
I think
driving that sort of through? Yeah,
it's a great question. It's something, again, we come across regularly. So traditionally, I would say that this would normally sit in IT, because obviously IT and security, that tends to be kind of the bucket that it falls within. But actually, where we've seen really good success in terms of implementations is when you've got kind of cross-departmental. So IT being the facilitator and obviously understanding the nuances of the technology. HR, for example, being the people that actually are on the receiving end of a lot of the pain. But then also business, right? You have to have the commercial team that are understanding, okay, in more wide, we maybe have one use case that we're looking to establish just now, but what are the arms and legs that can go on to this? So we really like to see kind of a cohort of people that to make the implementations particularly successful. And again, it's things that, we have ITC and Condatis, we've worked on a number of different kind of repeatable patterns to say these are the people we would like to talk to if that is appropriate. And then again, we can make sure that we're, tackling everybody's problems, because that's the whole point of the technology. It should solve more than one issue.
Yeah, rather than it being driven by an individual department, like traditional identity products, the identity, you have to go and choose a product and implement that product. It tends to be more driven by business requirements and risk. And so it's coming from the top down rather than someone trying to get buy-in from the rest of the business.
So will they then work with HR in that respect, or how will that work?
Absolutely. Yeah. Depending, as I say, on the use cases, who are the stakeholders that are particularly on the kind of the receiving end of that pain point, and it's navigating that through the different organisations. Yeah,
it's a really interesting subject. Any other questions on the floor? One in the middle here.
Gillian, hi. This may sound slightly caustic, and I'm not at all convinced that a universal monopoly of Microsoft wouldn't be a good idea in some ways, but what you're almost talking about is extending a de facto Microsoft monopoly in the corporate space into the public space, the education space, and other spaces as well. Would you say that's a fair comment?
At the end of the day, they do have a significant install base, right? So we want to make sure that, as I say, rather than if you already have a large Microsoft install within an organisation, what we don't want to do is then turn around and say, oh, you have to rip and replace and go with a completely different product, for example. And it's not as if, yes, it is, we are talking about a particular Microsoft example here, but it's not like that's not built on open standards as well. They are driving a lot of the standards and are very involved in that too. So it's not like we're saying it's a Microsoft thing and therefore it can only be, there's a lot of movability and portability with it as well.
Just for clarity, does Microsoft have a stable of identity providers with which it works and who can prove identity remotely for the benefit of corporates and education and government?
Sure, all publicly available on their websites. They have a lot of information that are there right now, and yeah, they are building up a list of partners and partner networks that they are working with. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks very much.